Hi everybody, diagrams are absolutely fundamental when it comes to writing your essays, and when it comes to paper one, there are 7 really powerful, hot diagrams that you should take note of, that you should weigh up, give an extra little bit of time towards making sure you can draw these well, but also to ensure you know how to use these well. Where can they add power to your analysis and your evaluation? Let's look at 7 very powerful micro diagrams that you can use in your paper 1, but also your paper 3. We're going to start with the monopoly diagram. The monopoly diagram is amazing, not just because it shows monopoly outcomes. That's the basic diagram. Looking at this, we can see monopoly price, monopoly quantity. We can also show supernormal profit if we want to, but it's so diverse. We can actually show alongside just basic monopoly outcomes and the efficiencies and inefficiencies of monopoly. We can show all of these things in red. That's how diverse this diagram is. We can show the objectives of firms as well. For example, profit max, MC equals MR, revenue max, MR is 0, sales maximization, AC equals AR, even profit satisficing. Very great to show the objectives of firms. We can show the competition comparison. So we have monopoly outcomes of PM and QM. We can also compare to competitive outcomes. So we know on this diagram, competitive firms would be allocatively efficient. We know that. Allocative efficiency is where P equals MC, that takes us here. So we can show that competitive outcomes will be QC and PC, exactly what we know. Lower prices in competitive markets, higher quantities in competitive markets. That's exactly what this diagram shows you as well. We can also show the deadweight welfare loss of monopoly. Now we know that it's this triangle here. I'm going to shade it in. I'm going to shade it in all the way there. And that consists of the top bit, which is the deadweight welfare loss of consumer surplus, and the bottom bit, which is a deadweight welfare loss of producer surplus. So very powerful if we're linking to the real issues, allocative inefficiency of monopoly, but also if we're linking monopoly power to a market failure. We can also show the impact of competition policy. Yeah, policies like privatization, like deregulation, even nationalization. We wouldn't call that a competition policy, but all the outcomes of those are to move away from monopoly pricing and monopoly quantity towards competitive pricing, towards competitive quantity, the socially optimum level, allocatively efficient levels, the public interest. So you would show that simply with arrows. So moving from PM to PC and QM to QC, lower prices and higher quantities. We can also show contestable market outcomes on here. We know in a contestable market, this monopolist would move to producing where AC equals AR. You can show the lower prices and higher quantities as a result there, gains in consumer surplus too. But we can also show the impact of a monopoly price cap. So this is monopoly regulation, the price cap, maximum price that a regulator might set on a monopolist. Where would that price cap go? It would go at PC, right? So maximum price at PC, that's the allocatively efficient price. So you would show that simply by putting a maximum price there, call it the price cap, right? Or the maximum price. And the impact of that will be, again, your lower prices and your higher quantities. How amazing is this? And with that, the gain in consumer surplus. Incredible diagram, not just in its simple form, but because of how diverse it is. Give it weight in your revision. Make sure you know how to use it in its basic form, but also with all of these things added on top. Incredible diagram. Now, number 2, we have this very, very powerful diagram. I call it the monopoly economies of scale evaluation diagram. And what you're saying here is that even though a monopolist is productively inefficient, because they are so much greater in size than small competitive firms, they may still have greater economies of scale than competitive firms, and therefore actually be able to price lower and produce a higher quantity than competitive firms. It's an incredible evaluation point because you reverse the traditional theoretical outcomes of monopoly. And here is your diagram. So you would say that a monopolist's marginal cost curve is lower than for competitive firms. Why? Because of the greater economies of scale advantage. Competitive firms, allocatively efficient, that gives you PC and QC. Monopolist profit maxing will give you PM and QM. And you can see lower prices in monopoly, higher quantities in monopoly. And that is all because you would say the greater economies of scale can end up giving us this outcome in the market. Incredible use of this diagram, very powerful in your evaluation. And now number 3, such a powerful diagram, and that is your game theory payoff metrics to illustrate oligopoly. We can say that oligopoly tends to represent a prisoner's dilemma game, and here is the prisoner's dilemma game applied to an oligopoly. And the issue in oligopoly is interdependence. What price should a firm charge? The high price, I've called it £1, or the low price 90p. So here we have it. What you have to do is have numbers ready to go. So in the cell where you've got both firms charging the high price, give high payoffs, high profits. I've said £5 million each. For both firms going for the low price, 90p each, give lower profits. So I've said £1 million each. But then for the sales where one firm is undercutting the other, so for example, this cell here where firm B is undercutting with 90p, firm A is going £1. The firm that undercuts, give them a very high profit, higher than if both firms were charging the high price. So I've said 6 million. And the firm that gets undercut, give them a low profit, lower than if both firms were charging 90p. I've said 0.5 million. And then it's reversed for this cell. That way, you're always going to get the correct Nash equilibrium at the end. The underlined numbers, so the rational outcomes, are always going to be here. So both numbers underlined for the low price, 90p, 90p. And then the 6 million will always be underlined. That way, if you get the numbers correct like this, you're always going to get a correct Nash equilibrium, the correct end outcome. So get your numbers ready, just memorize the table however you like the numbers to be, have it ready to go. And then how are you going to use it in your exam? This is brilliant, this diagram, because it links to price rigidity. This is the long run outcome, 90p, 90p can last forever. So competitive outcomes in oligopoly links you to that. There is clearly the incentive to collude and try and get £5 million each with a higher price. We can show that, but also the incentive to cheat on the collusive agreement. You can say, look, that £1 as a collusive pact may not last because there is always an incentive for a firm to undercut and go for 90p and try and hit this £6 million profit. So a brilliant diagram, very powerful. This will massively impress your examiners. Put it in your revision notes, give it weight. Now number 4, your indirect tax diagram. Know this diagram well because dissecting it will give you so many different areas. This is your basic demand and supply version, but you can also apply the same concepts to a market failure diagram where you're using an indirect tax to solve a given market failure. So here is your diagram with all the key bits included. You need to make sure you can do all of these 6 things on the right hand side. The impact on price and quantity, higher price, lower quantity should be simple. The value of the tax, the vertical distance between the two supply curves, in this case, is the tax per unit. The government revenue, here is a great trick. To work out the government revenue, always go to the new equilibrium, that is over here, the new equilibrium, work out the vertical distance between the two supply curves, that's the tax per unit multiplied by Q2. That will give you the area of the box, P2ABC. That is the government revenue. Great way to work it out. New equilibrium, that's the key thing to remember. Then the consumer and producer burden. The consumer is paying the difference in price of that box. So of that box, which is government revenue, the difference in price portion is the consumer burden or the consumer incidence. The rest is the producer burden or the producer incidence. Your producer revenue is area CBQ20. Producers are selling Q2 at a price of P2, but remember we have to minus off the government revenue, that'll give us producer revenue, and then the deadweight welfare loss is the triangle ABD. Indirect tax, brilliant. You can apply a lot of these concepts to a market failure diagram as well, such as the government revenue, such as the consumer incidence. Very, very powerful stuff. Same thing for a subsidy now. This comes up a lot in the exam when we have to break it down and know the key bits. This is the basic demand and supply version, but again, we can apply a lot of these concepts to a market failure diagram where you use a subsidy to solve a given market failure. Here is your base diagram with all the key bits on it. We need to make sure that we can use this diagram to show the change in price and quantity. Easy, lower price, higher quantity. The value of the subsidy per unit is the vertical distance between the two supply curves. Always the same. You see a lot of repeats with how we work out some of these areas, just like how we work them out with an indirect tax as well. The cost to the government, same as how we work out the revenue to the government with an indirect tax. Go to the new equilibrium. In this case, that's over here. The vertical distance between the two supply curves, AB, that's the value of the subsidy per unit. Multiply that by all the units being produced and sold, Q2. That will give you the area of this box, CDAP2. That is the total cost to the government of the subsidy. The producer revenue. Producers are now selling Q2 at a price of P2, fine, but they're also getting the subsidy on top. So producer revenue is C, B, Q2, 0. Huge producer revenue. Bear that in mind. Consumer saving. Consumers are now paying for Q1 units at a lower price. So the consumer saving is compared to paying P1 for quantity Q1. They're now paying P2 for Q1. So the saving is P2, P1, DE. That box there is now consumer saving for paying lower prices for the quantity of Q1. The deadweight welfare loss is the triangle ABD. Great to know all of that. You can apply a lot of these concepts to that market failure diagram, such as the cost of the government. That will be the key one. Fantastic. Let's move on. The link between PED and total revenue is always asked by examiners. We need to know it well in theory, yes, but also using diagrams. There are lovely diagrams you can use to show this relationship. And this can also be used for lots of different parts of the course too. Know this well. The two diagrams are drawn here. Now we know if a business knows that demand is price elastic, they should reduce their price to increase total revenue. Whereas if a business knows that demand is price inelastic, they should raise their price to increase total revenue. You want to prove both using diagrams. You just need to draw demand curves in each case. On the left, we have demand being price elastic. There's your fall in price. You just need to work out the differences in revenue, and then you would shade in and show the revenue gain being greater than the revenue loss, like this one is. And when demand is price inelastic, draw it very clearly price inelastic, show the raise in price, show the changes in revenue in terms of the revenue gain and then the revenue loss. Because the revenue gain is greater than the revenue loss, we have the increase in total revenue. Important diagrams, know these well. And let's finish with this absolute beauty, the impact of a trade union in a monopsony labor market, also known as a bilateral monopoly right here. This is a sexy old diagram. Make sure we know this one well. Make sure that we can analyze it well and show the impacts of a trade union very clearly. Okay, the way to construct this, we've got to start with a monopsony labor market and monopsony labor market outcomes. So monopsonist profit maximizes when they're employing workers. That takes us to MRP equals MC of L. That gives us QM, and the wage rate, we read it off the AC of L curve of WM. Also, we want to compare to competitive labor market outcomes, go to a demand equals supply, that gives you WC and QC. So we can see monopsonists restrict employment and they also offer very low wages. But then you want to show the impact of a trade union, and how a trade union coming in here having these awesome outcomes can both raise wages and also increase employment. This is a very sexy, sexy diagram. Know it very well. Make sure we can analyze it well. Very powerful. You'll impress examiners big time. So there you go, guys. 7 hot diagrams, fire diagrams, power diagrams. Give them extra weight in your revision. Know them well. They're going to score huge marks if you can use them well. Thanks so much for watching. We're going to do the same for macro.